Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that previous session on contract cheating. Just to close the loop on that, I wanted to let you know that I posted in the community board an article that was recently published by Sarah Eaton, which provides an overview of some of the work that she presented on. Turning to the upcoming session, it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Verna Billy Mina-Barriette and Dr. John Chenoweth from the Nicola Valley Institute of Technology. Both Verna and John have a long history of work within the BC transfer system and also with BC CAT. Verna previously sat on BC CAT's council and is currently the vice president of NVIT. And Dr. John Chenoweth is a current member of BC CAT's council and is the AVP for Academic Community Education. They're going to be providing us with an overview of the Indigenous Fluency Program that they have developed in partnership within the BC transfer system. Just as a reminder, please make sure to push your questions into the chat as well as the Q&A because John and Verna will be joining us live at the end of this session. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to be presenting here with Dr. John Chenoweth, my cohort. And we're going to move right into have a discussion around the Language Fluency Certificate, Diploma, and Degree program that has been instituted in our province. In the slide, you'll have some speaking notes. I'm not going to go over them, but you will be able to have them at your hand. Dr. John Chenoweth has been with NVIT for many, many years. He was our former chair. He is also now our associate vice president. I am with NVIT since 1983 and have done a lot of work around language redevelopment. The history of our language fluency degree really rests with Dr. Jeanette Armstrong from the Anauken, Ayala, and UBCO consortium. Dr. Jeanette Armstrong was charged in 2000 to write a paper around the life of our language programming in this province and the whether our endangered species of our endangered languages and what they would look like. And Dr. Armstrong did write that, and that was the catalyst to develop the language fluency degree. Dr. Mike Evans has been our collaborative person who has been working with UBCO and has been the coordinator within the system to help us develop the language fluency degree. The Language Fluency Consortium and UBCO agreed upon a framework. The consortium really consists of several organizations that have come together in the early 2007 to start talking about how are we going to revitalize language, what that would look like, and who is going to be involved. So one of the things that we wanted to ensure that the language program was transferable, it was latterable, and that the whole program was mobile. So that meant that our program, whatever we designed, our framework that we designed, had to be able to go from a little organization or a little community like Fort Ware in the north to the big successful communities in the south. And we all had to be able to work on the same framework and move forward our language. That way we didn't have a whole bunch of different kinds of standards or structures that were not successful within the post-secondary system. So it was really imperative for us to make sure that we had those conversations around the province, not only with First Nations communities and language experts, but also with the post-secondary system itself. We did that through designing a consortium. One of the reasons that we started to do this was because the calls to action under the TRC, language was a huge component of that system and that report. And it also gave us the critical stage we needed in order to move the province and the post-secondary system further along in language development. So it was our catalyst, along with Dr. Jeanette Armstrong's paper, that really got us involved in how we built the framework and having those discussions and bringing the post-secondary system to the table. So initially, the framework committee that we started with in 2007 was Dr. Jeanette Armstrong, who at the time was the executive director of the Anaukin Center and vice chair of IALA. She is now a professor at UBC Okanagan. Myself, Verna, Dr. Mike Evans, who was our coordinator from UBC Okanagan, Dr. Mark Dale, who came from UNBC, Dr. Patricia Shaw and Dr. Candace Gala from UBC, who are also sitting in those systems. And then as we progressed, we had Dr. Marianne Ignis and Dr. Peter Jacobs from SFU. SFU signed on to the consortium, and Dr. Oanawa McIver from UVic. Also signed on to the consortium. This consortium is the one that really hammered out the framework. We had a lot of discussions around what the standards would look like, how would we take a language fluency model and move it into an immersion, and how would that immersion structure then be accredited through a university system. So it took us several years and a lot of meetings and a lot of discussion around how we would build that. And so part of our structure and the history to all of that, of course, is that we have the First Nations Language First Nations Language Education Steering Committee that has a connection to all 117 First Nations communities in the province, which really is the anchor to how we structure our education system in this province. And the Indigenous Adult and Higher Learning Association, which was it morphed from a former Aboriginal Association of Post-Secondary Institutes, which was in existence for many years in the 90s and then into the 2000s into IALA. There are now 43 member institutes. We have added on 3 more in the last little while. These Aboriginal controlled institutes are the institutes that live in the communities and in the nations, and they are structured and organized and governed by those nations or by those First Nations communities. So it was important for us to understand that these IALAs and those communities needed to have ownership, and they needed to have construction of their own language system. But we needed that system in order to be mobile and transferable. It needed to be in a framework that everyone was able to utilize. IALA developed, I think it was in 2000, Dr. Jeanette Armstrong was charged to write a paper for IALA around the language, in the communities, whether or not the proficiency model was working. We've had several years of proficiency. Under that paper, Dr. Jeanette Armstrong had identified that we needed to move to an immersion model because proficiency wasn't fast enough and our languages were dying quickly. So that's when we structured that whole structure, the framework in 2014, 2015, in order to start moving forward. Some of the things that helped us build that and helped us along the way, of course, are the TRC, the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Peoples, the DRIPA, and the other one that is the one catalyst for the federal government is the 2019 Indigenous Language Act. And so the Languages Act is really one of the things that has been able to help us move not only language forward, but funding for that language. The vision for the language fluency proficiency degree was to reflect and embed the cultural distinctions, the culturally distinct requirements of First Nations community and First Nations post-secondary institutional partners, which is our PSI system. In that process, we developed the guiding principles that we would assume under this structure. So those guiding principles was the foundation of increasing First Nations language as the primary objective. Accessibility through First Nations community-based delivery in the first 2 years, certificate and diploma years, which really means delivering it in the community with an IALA institution and a partner post-secondary institution. That there is equitable partnerships with First Nations communities, that we meet the quality assurance and to ensure that we have mobility, access, and ladderability of our programming within the public system. The transferability of our programs need to be ensured, and we will be working with BC CAT on that. And then we need to really think about the flexibility of multiple exit points within the program. That is because we will have people moving in and out of the program, and we need to ensure that they don't lose momentum, but they also don't lose credits that they transition into. It's really important for us because a lot of the times things will happen in community that we do not have any control of. And especially if we lose an elder or a speaker, then that causes that community some instability. And so we have to be able to do that multi-exit point structure. And the last thing is to really respect the intellectual property within First Nations protocols. And when I'm talking about that, I will talk a bit more about that. But the intellectual property is extremely important for our First Nations communities because they are the owners of the language, the protocols, the community-based structures, and the land-based education. And if we don't have that, and if our post-secondary systems don't respect that, our communities will not work with you. And so you need to really be clear that that intellectual property must remain with the First Nation community or the language speakers. One of the things that we talked about when we were building the framework was the ability to increase the levels of fluency. And we wanted to do that through the process of immersion. We have worked several years with the proficiency levels, and we haven't had the kinds of requirements we needed in order to ensure that our languages are living and breathing languages. So we are now moving to an immersion model. And that immersion model is, of course, is built around the maraes of New Zealand, the Maori. And so we've taken some of those and we've moved that into our structure. So one of the things that we talked a lot about was the fluency of our instructors, which are language speakers. Those language speakers do not have undergraduate degrees and or doctorates. So our system needs to understand that language instruction supersedes all other program requirements, and that meeting First Nations language is an acquisition. Community-based delivery needs to be supported through the immersion program, and we need to use the current best practices in order to make that happen. So when we're talking about language instruction superseding, our post-secondary institutions needs to work with the language speakers of those communities to ensure that they have the credentialing and or the system in place in order to ensure that our language courses are transferable. And that means a lot of things. It's a lot of work of doing that. So that might mean there's co-workers, co-teachers. We have a doctorate person working with a language speaker in a program and to ensure those things happen. So that's one of the biggest things that we do. Transferability, we've been working with BC CAT on our language transferability. Our courses need to be province-wide recognized and articulated so that our students, regardless as to where they sit and where their home is, they have the ability to move within the system and to move from institution to institution. It is no different in a language degree than it is in a Bachelor of Arts degree. And that's the kind of structure that we're building and want to build. And so we're working closely with BC CAT. We also have to have flexibility. The multiple exit points, sometimes people will stop out because of family situations happen, disasters, and we've had several of them in the province in the last few years. And so we need to understand that that's what's going to happen, and we have to build and understand in our system that we need to make space for that. And so that's one of the ideas around building that space. This is what I talked about, the intellectual property. The First Nations language families' intellectual, tangible, and intangible properties will be respected. Knowledge transfer will respect the protocols and cultural frameworks necessary to the integrity of the language family. and the language course content will be developed and owned by First Nation community or First Nations Post-Secondary Institute. Many of our communities who own their IALAs are putting all of their resources and their trust in their IALA institution to do the right thing by their nations, and that right thing is to ensure that their intellectual property is withheld in their territories. And so if you're a post-secondary wanting to work with that institution around language development, please understand that intellectual property is a huge thing within our structure. And if we can't get around that, then they won't work with you. And I'm just going to be very blunt about that. If you can't get your head around what that ownership is around intellectual property, then they will not work with you. This is our structure around our language, and this is how it is built. This is the framework that we've developed. So you'll see that there are, the certificate is in the bottom sector, that this is all immersion. There is no English spoken in year 1, no English spoken in year 2. This is all immersion. When you get to year 3, you start pulling a whole idea around building in English and building in the language transition courses, like your ways of knowing and social foundations. That may be in English and in the language. So this is what the whole process around building that language structure looks like. And if you look at the blue on here, the blue is immersion. The is your immersion courses. Your pink color is your revitalization courses. And the green is the courses required by university systems in order to get a degree. And so that's how the foundations are structured. And from this point, I am going to turn it over to Dr. John Chenoweth.
Thank you very much, Verna, for that great introduction to the program. Something that I'm very honored to share with everyone is the actual pilot that we're running here at MVIT. And just for your information, we do have 4 Indigenous languages within our pilot program at the Nicola Valley Institute of Technology. They include the Xtatlium, the Syilx, the Ntlakaemuk, and the Nadutan languages. Now, in terms of our partnership activities to date, signing an agreement with all the public post-secondaries in the province was a big stepping stone for us. Co-hosting adult language educators focus groups and the Fluency Symposium was a big step. The degree framework activities, nested certificate diploma degrees passed at the partnership table in 2019, and getting to the Ministry of Advanced Ed in the following May was huge for us. And then the certificate and diploma within Syilx language going through UBC Okanagan Senate, and therefore after going through to the ministry, the DQAB for approval was a huge step. And now we're also working with UNBC for the Nadutan languages. In terms of NVIT, we do feel that we do have a very unique way of working with our communities. And in terms of immersion, we've been teaching language for a long time, but never an immersion model. So this is quite new to us as well, and it has taken some learning from our faculty as well as our partners and our partners' faculties in their respective communities. But it is a unique way to teach the language, and it's something that we're learning a lot along the way. This is Mandy Nadzinik Jimmy, who is our coordinator at MVIT for the Ntlakaemuk language. And she's a pivotal player in ensuring that our current instructors in the Ntlakaemuk are well-versed in not only the technology in terms of like Zoom meetings, Microsoft Teams, but as well as developing resources that are critical to the success of our deliveries. And working with our partners in the Xtatlium, the Nadutan, and the Syilx are equally important. And she's a key member of our committee for our advisory committee. Our locations, we have on-campus, online, and community locations with our partners. I'll give you one example. In the Xtatlium for the certificate, they had over 50 students start, and a lot of those students participated in face-to-face during the pandemic with social distancing, as well as majority of students joining in online, just as we're doing now. And I'm going to tell you, it'll come up later, but one of the challenges of delivering a language program was doing it remotely with our elders, technology, people's access to technology and internet in their communities. But you know what? Everyone persevered, and we've got a wonderful story to share with you. In terms of career opportunities for our graduates of the certificate or diploma or third and fourth year at the degree levels, you know, a lot of the people taking these courses want to do it to learn their language because they've never had the opportunity. Others want to learn the language because they're in a leadership role in their community and they want to be able to have more of a connection to their identity as a people. You know, other Indigenous organizations are looking for people that have a language background to connect with elders, and the band and public schools are always looking for fluent educators to teach, you know, and family and groups, facilities, care homes. Anytime a student could be more connected to their identity, it's going to really benefit. And lastly, tourism is something that I feel we're just scratching the surface of in this province and country around the world's desire to learn more about Indigenous people. Now, as any other program in any other public post-secondary institute, we do have admission requirements for the certificate. Because it is a first-year program, we have a grade 12 or equivalent or mature student status, and that comes with it the English 12 and all the other equivalents in the K-12 system, and a letter of intent detailing why one is interested. Now, we are ensuring that this program is accessible, and for a lot of students who don't meet the program requirements, something that we don't want to have happen under our watch is that people don't have access to their own language. And I'll get into that a little later in some of the barriers that we've came across. In terms of the language fluency diploma, you know, if we look at the flow as Verna shared earlier, you can see that this is the second year of the Ntlaka'pamux as a pilot. For the purposes of this program and the framework, this one has Ntlaka'pamux language. We could have Nsilk, Nadutan, and or Statlia all in because they're all identical in terms of the framework. And we just want to show you that there's a total of 66 credits and that we do have a minimum GPA of 2.33. But this is a completion program for the diploma. And for the certificate, the same concept I want to share with everyone is that we start with 110 all the way through to 181. And we do have them broken into, as Verna shared, into a fall semester, a spring semester, and then a summer semester where we finish off the certificate. So we do 4 courses fall, 4 spring, and 2 courses in the first half of the summer semester. In terms of our course program transferability, we're working with BCCAT and we had a very nice dialogue with them around, well, where does Indigenous language fit within our system? Because we do know we have one of the best transfer systems in the world for post-secondary. When we throw language, Indigenous language into that mix, I know a lot of schools are right now coping with, what do we do with a Nadutan course through NVIT if they want to transfer to UNBC? What do we do with maybe a Statlia course in first and second year if a student decides to transfer to UBC or SFU? I know that each school is having to really look at where do Indigenous language programs fit within the BC transfer system. And I'll tell you, I'll share what else Verna shared earlier is we have a pilot with 4 language courses just through us. We have many, at least 24 languages in BC, and it will pop up in every single school around the province because it's not going to stop. And with the momentum we're building, all schools are going to have to really talk and work together around how do we articulate and provide transfer avenues and paths for Indigenous language. In terms of challenges that we've came across in this is that how does the human capacity in the community work? I mean, we're very fortunate to have fluent instructors in every community, but as Werner shared prior, if they're put into a teaching role, what does that look like? How do you take an elder who's fluent in their language and say, okay, now go into a classroom with 20 students and start teaching, right? So there's a lot of behind the scenes work that's required so that elder has the support necessary, the curriculum and resources necessary to do a fantastic job in sharing what they know right through their whole core of their being. And in terms of existing infrastructure, we know that the third and fourth year of the degree will also be offered in community. So we have to really ensure that we have the technology and human resources at the community level to support these. And that's a reality. We know that some communities are limited in terms of having fluent speakers, and how can you ensure that one person isn't going to teach everything? Like, for example, our Mandy Nadzinik Jimmy, she ended up hiring about 4 or 5 other teachers because she can't teach 24 to 40 courses a year. It's just not humanly possible. And in terms of public post-secondaries being willing to be active in supporting partners, that's a real reality. And the last one related to the entrance requirements, we as a post-secondary system and we as an education system are responsible as a system for Indigenous people losing language. We certainly don't want to be responsible as a system for creating a barrier so people can't get into the language because they don't have the prerequisites. So that's something that every post-secondary school will have to play with, and I know you probably have already, but we don't want to be a reason for Indigenous communities losing language as well as blocking Indigenous people from trying to relearn their languages. So that's a very important part for us. Our next steps, we're going to need funding, especially as these pilots move on to the diploma levels. We know that in Silkchin, in the Okanagan, they're already going into level 3, but they're also have students running at level 1 and 2. For the Nadutan and the Stadlium and the Intlakamak, we'll have most of these communities are completed to level 1, the certificate. So funding for level 2, but funding for also starting a new level 1 group, because we're very, very pleasantly aware that since the pilots, more and more people are coming out of their community network saying, I want to learn my language too, and how can I sign up? So finding resourcing to keep these pilots moving through to the degree, if one desires, is very important. Secondly, partnerships between the community and the post-secondaries is going to be very crucial to the success of these. And in terms of the ministry's approval of the INSILC language fluency degree, that's the first one. And we tip our hat and celebrate, but we'll have many, many more degrees coming down the pipe toward the ministry through DQAB and seeking the ministry approval for new language fluency degrees. And then the capacity to collaborate and share revitalization success stories and failures like we do with our advisory committee. We need to grow that into more of a provincial model, as well as more and more communities want to work with BSIs to develop their language instruction. And that's where we're at.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So I hope you enjoyed that recording, and it is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. John Chenoweth from NBIT, Dr. DeVerna Billy Minibariette from NBIT, as well as Dr. Rob Fleming from BC CAT, which of course means that I am just Mr. Mike. So we have a few questions coming in through the chat, and please, for those that are watching online, feel free to submit your questions in the chat or the Q&A. The first question we have is from Priscilla Stone from Vancouver Community College. And she writes that the program sounds fantastic and I love the multi-exit points. Once the student starts the program, is there a maximum time to complete the program? I'll ask that question to John.
Sure. Thank you. No, typically we say there's a shelf life of approximately 10 years, depending on the programs. But in terms of the language, I don't think myself as a school administrator at NVIT would provide a barrier to a student who maybe took these courses 10 years ago. So we would have to let them continue on, because I wouldn't treat this program as another program within our offerings.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. When you take a look at the development of this program, what would you say that some of the were some of the biggest obstacles you found in just getting it off the ground? I'm gonna ask you that question, Verna.
Some of the obstacles, there were several. One was the biggest obstacle we had as an Indigenous community was to get our heads around the differences between fluency and proficiency. And we had a lot of debate, years of debate around what that meant for us and how it would support our communities and our language learning. And so it took about 10 years and a paper that Dr. Jeanette Armstrong wrote for us to get into that ideal around what we were looking for, which was fluency. I guess then after that, the second biggest challenge was bringing the post-secondary system on board with us. And we had several meetings with the deans of education. And we were fortunate in that it didn't take us 10 years to do that. It took us 5 to get our minds around what a degree would look like. And first of all, what a certificate would look like in immersion. And so with the deans that came on board and the institutions, the 5 institutions working with us at the IALA level, that was then moved into that idea where we would then build the framework. And then the third one, of course, and is still the contentious one, is financing the language programming. So those have been the 3 biggest issues. We also thought that one of the biggest issues, which didn't turn out to be one, was the different dialects and the different language families and how they would all come on board under one framework. And I mean, a lot of work went into building that framework with other communities and other language families. So it's more of a seamless transition now than it is an issue.
John, do you have any, do you want to build upon any of the challenges you found in the development of this program?
I know that Verna talked about the system, and we have met with Rob about the transfer of credits from one institution to another. And that's something I think we as a whole system need to keep very mindful of as we, this is an infant stage right now, and it's going to be growing, and we'll have a number of other languages wanting to join the framework. So keeping in mind that how are we going to work as a system to not only accommodate, but encourage further development of language courses like this will be huge. Another one, I know, we launched all these pilots during a pandemic, and that in itself, hands up to all of our community partners for moving into I'll give you one example. The Insilk or the Okanagan, they went to Facebook Live the weekend after everything shut down, and that's just speaks to the determination of our communities to keep this project on the tracks. But so around any barrier, it might have been around technology and access to technology and connectivity for our students who are in remote communities during a pandemic. But I would say, and I think Verna would agree, that we're pretty proud of our communities and how they rallied to ensure students had access.
Catherine Crow, who you may be familiar with from NVIT, is asking roughly how many communities are offering this program, and what have the enrollments been like? Maybe I'll leave it with you, John.
Well, right now we're working with 4 different languages: the Nadutan up around the Burns Lake area, the Statliam in the Lillooet area, the Intlakamak in the Nicola Valley and Lytton areas, the Fraser Canyon, and the Insilk over in the Okanagan. Each community group, language group, has at least one and as many as maybe 4 different locations that they're delivering language classes. We've had approximately 120 head count students participating in all of them as an average, anywhere from 50 students in one language group to 15 to 20 in another. So quite large groups. And I think that, it's going to be growing as we enter into the new year as well. But as Verna mentioned, as a barrier, accessing ongoing funding to support these is crucial.
Teresa Kisilovich from Okanagan College is asking, are these programs open to non-Indigenous students, or is Indigenous heritage one of the admission requirements?
Well, sorry, Verna, I'll answer that one. I say, we targeted this program to help rebuild lost languages and communities, but we will not tell a community who they can or cannot have in their cohorts. So as far as non-Indigenous people taking it, I'm not aware of too many, but there's certainly, from our perspective, if a community says we would like you to join the program, we're not going to stand in their way. Would you agree, Verna?
I agree.
Yeah.
It's totally up to the community.
Yeah, so perhaps related to that, Julie Lee is asking, do First Nations people have priority for entrance into this program, or is it simply for anyone who fulfills the admission requirements?
Well, that's a two-folded question. Right now, in terms of class size, like I'll give you an example. In the Statliam over in Lillooet, they had about almost 60 people interested and sign up. Well, we can't have an elder and instructor teaching 60 people in one grouping online. It was just too big a group to really be effective in terms of the modeling required by the framework. So they broke that into 2 classes. And even then, Verna, I think those were too big at 25 per group. Yeah. So we will leave that to the communities. If they have more students and they say, you know what, we're better off with a group of 12 to 15, then we'll have to find funding to ensure they can do that.
Yeah, under the immersion model, it's better to have less so that you have more interaction with the actual speaking, as opposed to trying to deliver it in a curriculum based. So immersion is very experiential.
Yeah, and I know around the prerequisites, we have, as any other program in our system, a grade 12 graduation requirement. Now, that said, we came across very early on a number of community members that residential school, never completed school. Maybe I'm 55 years old and I'm a survivor from a school, and then I try to take my language and I don't meet the entrance requirement, right? So I know Verna and I will say there is no way in heck we're going to deny someone access to learn their language that the system took away in the first place. So we don't want the system to do this twice. So we do have prerequisites for the program. We work closely with communities around the community members who want to take the language, but we certainly will not deny a community member who wants to learn their language access to the program.
Well said, and I'm really grateful to hear you say that, John. This is actually kind of a related question from Diane Bin from Selkirk College, who is asking, and I'll ask this question to you, Verna. Has there been any discussion in ways that a regional college could support delivery of this program to participants who may live off or away from community? So perhaps as a satellite site or something like that.
All of our programs are satellite programs. None of our programs, except for Inlakapmok, is on campus, and even Inlakapmok is delivered in the Fraser Canyon remotely. So one of the structures around building the framework is that the language speakers have to come from the communities. The language speakers don't come from the institutions. And so if, for instance, Selkirk wanted to deliver Tanaha in their territory, they would build the framework around Tanaha. And the Selkirk College would sign on with our framework under the consortium with UBCO, and NVIT, UNBC. We have SFU and UVic as well, UBC Vancouver as well coming on board. And then those institutions then are the ones that start to build those relationships within. And so we are negotiating right now as a consortium right now with TRUs because they want to sign on for Secwepemc. So it's really up to that institution whether or not they want to invest the time, the money, and find the language speakers in order to deliver. The framework is out there. Anybody can use the framework, and anybody can access with NVIT, access how we developed that framework in courses and how we have adapted that to the immersion process. So yes, it's open. People can more institutions that come on board and are prepared to put some time and energy and money into the program, the better off for language speakers.
That's excellent. We are at time, but we have a few things that a few comments that I think both John and Rob wanted to offer to you, Verna. So I'm going to start with you, John, and then I'm going to pass it off to you, Rob. So John.
Yes, thank you, Verna. You didn't know about this, but I've had the pleasure of working with Verna since 2007 when I came here, and prior to that, when I was on the NVIT board. And I know Verna that she says she's retiring at Christmas. But I do want to tell you how much of a mentor and role model you have been, and the breadth you go to support Indigenous people right across the country, around the world, in education, higher learning. This program is but one small example of that, and it's a huge program and a very important program. And I just want to thank everyone for participating in this session. And for myself, I see it as a way to honor the work that Dr. Billy Minabariet has done for Indigenous people. So thank you, Verna.
Thank you.
Thank you, Verna. And Rob, you wanted to offer a few comments as well?
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks, John. And thanks, Verna, for a wonderful presentation and your tireless efforts in making this program a reality with your community partners and so many others. And I want to echo what John has said, Verna, and thank you personally and professionally for what has been a decades-long relationship now, and your patience and kindness with me, but not only with the council, but in my previous vice president and other roles. You have been a great mentor, but also a great champion for Indigenous learning and the system as a whole. We'll miss you in your current capacity, but we'll have continuity. So thank you, Verna.
Thank you ever so much. I really appreciate that. You're going to make me cry.
Well, it's not our intention to make you cry, but I do want to thank you all for this very informative and interesting session. I think this is a wonderful program, and I really hope that more institutions partner with NVIT to help deliver this degree program, because I think it's very important, and I really hope to see it succeed. That brings this session to a close. Yes.
Michael, if I could, just to tell all participants, if anyone has any questions about the framework, they know how to get a hold of us.
Yes.
Get a hold of us. We're here to help. We want to expand this whole project. So
yes, get a hold of John or Verna up until the end of December, and then Verna is going to be enjoying a well-earned retirement. All right, thank you everybody for joining us in this session. We're going to take a brief break, and then we will be back at it at 11:30 for the session called Technology Expansion in All Days, in All Ways. So I will see you shortly. Thank you.